Welcome, Pastor Benjamin Dixon. We appreciate you joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Our pleasure, our pleasure. So you reached out to me a while back and you told me that you stumbled across some horrifying information that we're going to get to here in a second. But to tie this in, I want to point out that there was effectively a MAGA terrorist attack in Minnesota very recently where a bunch of Democrats were shot, some Democrats were killed. I'm talking Democratic legislator, somebody who was one of the top Democrats in the state of Minnesota and helped get through Tim Walz's agenda. And of course, the right went into full gaslighting mode and lying mode and pretending like that was actually a lefty who did it when all the facts say the opposite. And when you reached out to me, you explained that you had some data, some evidence that indicated that indeed stuff like this was coming.
Yes, absolutely. And I thank you for bringing in the context of what happened in Minnesota, where Minnesota State Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark were killed by a man who was clearly aligned with Donald Trump and MAGA. And it is a direct mirror of the research that we were doing using artificial intelligence inside of Twitter X and using Grock. And what we saw was an escalation not only in narrative, but also in the frequency and the intensity of narrative shifts towards violence. And any time in history, particularly if you look at the history of violence towards Black people, you will see that it always is preceded by narratives, always preceded by some type of advertisements, flyers in Tulsa, Oklahoma, or just the whispers that led to the murder of Emmett Till. Similarly, we're seeing this on social media, particularly X, where there's an increase in violent rhetoric with intent, and we use AI to suss it out. And unfortunately, in our research, we focused on the violence that we believe is coming towards the Black community. But had we focused on the violent rhetoric towards Democrat political violence, I believe we probably would have seen some of the same evidence.
Can you talk to us about what some of those specific narratives are that you're seeing?
Yeah, and so the narratives really is narrative shifts, right? So there's always been anti-Black narratives. There's always been anti-democratic narratives, and I mean democratic and with a small d, particularly leaning us towards fascism. But since Elon Musk purchased Twitter, since this election, we've seen incremental shifts in language. Specifically, if we talk about the Black community, there's always been Black people are inherently violent type of rhetoric. There's always been some mild racial slurs. So we're not talking about anything like that. We're talking about the shift now where you have hashtag TND, which stands for total N-word death. I'm censoring myself, obviously, but total N-word death, calling for the genocide of Black people, total Negro deportation, calling for ethnic cleansing. And it's all a subset of hashtag Black fatigue, where there are many, many, many white Americans, MAGA, conservative Americans, who have convinced themselves that they are just so fatigued with Blackness that somebody has to do something about it. And so when we saw those shifts, we wanted to know, can we actually quantify it? And thankfully, the one thing Elon Musk did well was he embedded his artificial intelligence Grock directly inside of X. And so we leveraged Grock against X, and we got the results that we found.
And tell everybody what you found in terms of the numbers, because what you relayed to me was pretty terrifying in terms of the percentage likelihood of something horrific happening.
Yes, so Grock estimated a 50% chance of targeted violence against the Black community within the next 18 months, and then a 30% chance of mob violence against the Black community in the next 2 years as a specific result of the narrative and the narrative shifts and the frequency. And so basically we could break that down saying that they are hyping themselves up into a frenzy. They've gotten themselves inside of a frame. They've convinced themselves that something is wrong. Somebody has to do something about it. And unfortunately, I'm going to jump back now to what happened in Minnesota. Somebody did something about what they thought was a threat from Democrats.
How do you square this language with regard to the Black community with a lot of the rhetoric from the Trump campaign this time around and post-election that, there'd been a shift in Black voters towards Trump, and especially a shift in young Black men towards Trump, and a somewhat less racially divided demographic, although I think the thing with regard to Black voters was particularly overstated. But how do you square that rhetoric with what you've been seeing on X?
Yeah, no, what's fascinating is that I guess maybe not fascinating isn't the right word, but an evolution of fascism. Fascism this time is very diverse. It's very multicultural, particularly because the opportunity to make wealth based on being the anti-black black person, being the anti-woman woman, being the anti-Muslim Muslim. And so they have always been able to monetize that and bring those people to the forefront. But now with the algorithm, they monetize themselves, right? People are no longer being recruited directly by MAGA to do these types of things. They see an opportunity. Oh, I can go viral if I say something that's anti-black. And so it creates its own feedback loop, its own echo chamber. And what we ultimately see is that some people are genuinely being convinced by the narratives of, say, Jason Whitlock or Candace Owens. And so they do buy into MAGA. They go and they vote. But just like many of the Cuban community who are now like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that Donald Trump is doing what he actually said all along. There are black people who are starting to realize that now too as well.
So I noticed when Zohran Mamdani won the Democratic primary to be New York City mayor that the right really went mask off in a way that even still to this day was kind of jarring and shocking to me, even though I know about the depravity of the right. I mean, they're out there basically calling him a terrorist, comparing him to Al-Qaeda, you know, insinuating that he's the reason why 9/11 happened.
Saying there's going to be another 9/11 because he's mayor.
You know, you got Marjorie Taylor Greene out there putting like a burqa on the Statue of Liberty. Talk about the mainstreamification of these white nationalist talking points and ideas. And in your estimation, is it more extreme now than what we've seen?
Yeah, so, and this is exactly, I think, what our research kind of bore out, right? There has always been 4chan, right? There's always been Klan meetings, but these meetings are now in public spaces, right? The 4chan is no longer on the edges of society. They're dead center in on X, and across social media, generally speaking. I couldn't believe how vitriolic TikTok was, but it's all over social media. And so it's no surprise, but it's certainly still disheartening to see that we can have such a quick genuflection back, like just a flip right back to the very height of the anti-Muslim Islamophobic rhetoric that we saw leading up to the Iraq war. And now the thing though is it's moving with the speed of the algorithm. The only positive thing I can see from this is because they're so transparent, because it's so masked off, it has to be a very clear awakening for anyone who was on the fence before, anyone who decided to sit out the last election. Like, they're really showing you who you are. The only side effect, though, of all of this news cycle being as fast as it is that we forget. And so there's a good possibility that we're going to forget just how evil they were towards Zohran because he is a Muslim, just like I fear that we will forget what happened to those two, to the couple out of Minnesota.
Yeah. Yeah, this is something I've been thinking a lot about because things that used to be off the table, out of bounds, are now just in my Twitter timeline all day long and just have become, you know, completely normalized. You know, speaking of things that people maybe forgot, how long it was just like, a month ago that this lady who called a child on a playground the N-word was celebrated and they raised money for her. And you had a bunch of, you know, right-wing influencers going on and saying, no, we're going to say the N-word too. And she's a hero, etc. And this is, I mean, I don't know how to grapple with this. Like, how did we end up in this place? How do we put these things back so that they're, you know, have to be on the 4chan boards and have to be in the Klan meetings? Or is it a good thing that it's just out and out and we can all see the ugly face of just how unhinged and how racist and how, like, horrific this fascist movement ultimately is?
I think it's both and, Crystal. I'm hoping for a Scopes trial moment where the collective ignorance of all of them, even those who call themselves Christians, they're my fellow Christians, right? They are. But there needs to come a come to Jesus moment for the collective body politic where we can see that there are some people who are just decidedly evil, depraved. They're also abundantly ignorant. You'll notice that they have to reject science. They have to reject truth. Truth is their #1 enemy. And so we need a Scopes trial moment where the broader globe can see that there is a subset of America and the broader global population that simply has to be shamed into the dregs of society, where they go back into the dregs, back into the corners of society. I don't believe that we'll ever get rid of them, but I think we who know better and we who at least try to appeal to science, reason, and just the common greater good of decency, I think we are in the majority and we need to find each other and we need to reject and condemn the rest of them.
Yeah, I mean, as a secular person, I was always the type to, almost default to, well, at the core, we're all kind of the same, and you could find the good in people and find the bad in people and stuff like that. But what recent political trends in America have taught me is that, no, I actually believe in good and evil. And I think when I see some of what's going on, it's very easy for me now to point at it and say, that is fucking evil, and everybody needs to know that's evil. There is no gray area here. There is no steel manning the argument. It could just be pure evil. Let me ask you this. What do you make of the inability of the media to treat the threat as what it is? Because this is something that I'm struggling with, where it seems like we're ill-equipped to handle the threat that's right in front of us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The problem is that they have been trained on false equivalences, and they have the mandate. It's almost like it must be in their contract where they cannot call a thing a thing. They can't even call a lie a lie. And if you can't call a lie, you cannot actually do journalism. You can't. What you can do is perform. And what we have on all of our mainstream media outlets is performance. And you got to think about it in context. They're all owned by some subsidiary that's owned by a billionaire. So, of course, we should never look to the mainstream media for facts, because if they cannot say something is true and something is false, how can they ever deliver us facts?
I think there's also like an American exceptionalism bias inherent too, where it's like, oh, we're America. Fascism could never really fully rise up and take control of the political system here. We're different. It can't be that. And so, you can't say it forthrightly. I think that's part of what plays in is certainly the corporate ownership structure and the way that Trump has, gone after a bunch of these media organizations to compel their capitulation. And since they're more interested in whatever merger they want to get through than their actual commitment to facts, journalism, and truth, I think that's how you end up in the situation that we're in right now. But to me, it's a combination. I don't think the corporate power thing is the only explanation. I think it's that. And these are people who have sort of been chosen because they have these certain blinders on.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's probably a greater through line right there. You don't get into these positions unless they can trust that you will carry out that task. And so I think we're underneath a level of deception that the rest of us, we're the ones who might be slow to waking up to what this has really been all along. The fact of the matter is, I believe that we have been thoroughly underneath the stronghold of fascism at a level that we just couldn't admit to ourselves because of how dark and how grim that meant reality is. But I mean, I'm of the opinion that we're living in the upside down, where what we thought was right for so long, especially from the lens of American exceptionalism, turns out that we are the baddies. And then it takes us a minute for us to realize, wait a minute, we've been on the wrong side because of the nature of what American propaganda has raised us up to believe.
And also the belief that the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. I feel like a lot of people have that. I used to have that. But believing that almost makes you not want to fight as hard, because you feel like, well, that moral arc of history is going to bend back towards justice.
The moral arc is going to take care of it.
It'll be all right. And it's like, no, you have to make it, but you have to fight to make it bend in the right way.
That's right. Thank you for saying exactly that, because that statement, while I believe it's true, the people who are doing the bending, you could either step aside and say, okay, the universe is going to bend it, or God is going to bend it. But even in my faith tradition, the liberation gospel is like, we're the hands and the feet of God. If anything's going to get bent, it's going to, the way that came out is just hilarious. But if anything is going to bend the moral arc of the universe, it's going to be the actions that we take, standing against oppression, no matter where we find it, no matter who's doing it. If it's something being done by our government, we stand up to it. If it's something being done by our religion, we better stand up to it, because if we don't, that moral arc will last as long as humans allow it.
I'd like to talk to you a little bit about religion, because I'm also, secular, and I've been thinking a lot about this in the context of our complicity with Israel waging genocide in Gaza. And you have, these, I'm sure you watched the Tucker Cruz, I keep calling him Tucker Cruz, Ted Cruz, Tucker Carlson exchange, where Ted Cruz is telling Tucker that, you know, the Bible commands him to support Netanyahu's genocide. Unfortunately, as you know, you can tell me the biblical interpretation that you have of whatever section he was referencing there. Unfortunately, that's a view that plenty of Americans share, and even more percent of Republican political leadership shares. Trump himself put out to the public this text that he received, very long text that he received from Mike Huckabee about how he's been put in place by God for this moment, and this is as important as when we drop the bombs on Japan. So, you know, I just love for you to pull some of those threads about how, as someone who is Christian, obviously, like, you're a pastor, that's very central to who you are, how you process this sort of religious fanaticism in service of goals that are just genuinely evil and some of the most monstrous things you can literally imagine.
Yeah.
Hey guys, we had a conversation with Pastor Benjamin Dixon this week. It was an awesome conversation. He has some evidence and some details about potential more right-wing MAGA terrorism that's going to happen in this country. It's a super timely conversation, especially given what just happened in Minnesota. So definitely sign up on Substack below, watch the full thing. You don't want to miss it. And also, by the way, he's got this new project, thisspace.tv. Definitely check out thisspace.tv, and you can reach Pastor Ben at heypastorben@gmail.com.